How did Marcel Duchamp manage to become one of art's history's most iconic individuals, even though he didn't even really show his most famous works until the age of 76? To answer that, we need to return to that never truly agreed upon answer to the question, what is art? In this episode, we'll explore Marcel Duchamp. We'll try to find answers to these questions, as well as attempting to fly in under the radar of Duchamp, a notoriously secretive artist who in fact claimed not even to be an artist. So what was it about this guy that managed to change the concept of what art is more than anyone else? What made him who he was? And how did he do it? Let's find out. Hello and welcome to Deep Dance, the show where we explore how some creatives and artists manage to create deeper impact than the rest and in turn become timeless icons. I'm Matt and I'll be your host as we unravel the story of French-American creative maverick Marcel Duchamp. So let's start from the beginning. Duchamp was born 1887 in Normandy, France. He came from a large, well-to-do middle-class family. In fact, several of his siblings went on to be successful artists in their own right. Duchamp's grandfather was a painter, and so Marcel had at least a somewhat privileged and cultured childhood. He's described as intelligent, but not academic, and I wonder if we can see a bit of early defiance in Marcel as a child. Contrariness is something that would come to define Duchamp, if it's even possible to define him. Either way, he decided early on that he wanted to become an artist. So he goes on to study art at the Académie Julian. This is 1904 to 1905. Although clearly talented, he doesn't seem to have been all that interested in learning about art. He also at this time does mandatory army service and somehow gets involved in printing and typography during his army time. So it would seem that although he is a talented young artist, his interests seem to be somewhat beyond art itself. At this time, France and Paris in particular sees this golden time of all sorts of emerging art movements. But Cubism, Fauvism, other movements seem to somehow fail to impress Marcel. He does dabble a little bit with Cubism, but he seems to really dislike the other art movements. So, for example, he famously critiqued Matisse for making art only for the eye and not for the mind. But in 1909, Futurism is born, and this is finally art that seems to, at least a little bit, appeal to young Marcel. Modern machines and movements itself, this all appeals to him. He creates his first really famous artwork in 1912, Nude Descending a Staircase. It's a sort of hybrid of Cubism and Futurism. You will have seen it. But when he wanted to show it at the Cubist Independent Art Salon in Paris, he was rejected because it wasn't Cubist enough, according to them. And this is a massive moment for Duchamp. It's a turning point where he decides never to belong to an art group ever again. In fact, you could say that this is where his love of individual thinking starts to really blossom. And to some degree, he just gives up on painting, or at least the kind of painting where the brushstrokes express any kind of human hand or intention. Now, remember Warhol in the early 60s? Same thing. But of course, for different reasons. Now, of course, at this time, instead, Duchamp decides to study kind of his true passion, mathematics and physics. So let's look at the context of the times we're in here. This time period is sees as sort of global golden time, a golden era of scientific breakthroughs. So it's not hard to imagine a still young at this point Duchamp with his sharp mind being drawn to science. And there's one aspect of science in particular that becomes something that laid a foundation for Duchamp's later work, and it's the scientific experimental ideas of probability and chance. Because chance, as a tool in art creation, gives Duchamp what he's been looking for. It's art creation without conscious thought. Now, he's already experimented with this kind of art, doing simple things like dropping threads onto canvas for the thread to land wherever it wants, just by chance. And he's really interested in this concept of chance. We're now at the time of the First World War, and it's in the aftermath of the war that Dadaism is born, really as an anti-war movement. And that's a movement that its ideals fit very well with Duchamp's. Duchamp's ideas of anti-art creations and Duchamp's becomes a pivotal figure in this movement. He's already created some ready-mades at this point, the bicycle wheel, for example, mounted on a stall. Now, Duchamp himself claims that this was just created for his own studio so he could watch it spin as part of his experiments around chance. Even though in Duchamp's mind at this point, this wasn't even art. And it was only later that he named this and other objects, for example, like the bottle drying rack, ready-mades, since they were created from already made objects. So the idea of ready-mades is then very much the invention of Duchamp's. Random objects completely removed from any artistic expression, taste, or thought, or even human hand. This then is the artistic idea that's been pursued and copied for over 100 years after Duchamp. And crucially, they all do away with the old answer to what art is. The old definition was something along the lines of something beautiful created by skill. But never again after Duchamp will the answer to this question be that same again. So instead, Duchamp invites us into a new way of defining what art is. And it's in the head, in the concept, the idea. Remember how he critiqued Matisse for making art for the eye only? Well, Duchamp gives us a new world, a world where art is anything that can be defined as an idea. Now, at this point, Duchamp has moved to New York because his earlier work had been rejected in France. It turns out this work had sold successfully in the US, so he moves there. So in 1917, he wants to exhibit at the Society of Independent Artists. But as we know, he's completely done away with paintings at this time. So he wants to introduce his ready-mades to New York. Now, sadly, as it turned out, the original ready-mades, such as the bicycle wheel and bottle drying rack, had been destroyed in his absence back in France. So instead, he comes up with his most famous work ever, a true ready-made, if there ever was one. And it's the urinal, put on its side, signed, and given a title, The Fountain. Needless to say, it's a scandal, but the Art Society show can't technically stop him from showing it, so it's hidden behind a curtain during the show. But the new radical idea that art can be anything, including something shocking, could not be hidden. This act of rejection instead becomes an art world starting gun to other artists to be inspired by. And most art can never, ever be quite the same ever again. So, let's draw some conclusions. What made it possible for one man to change the definition of what art is or can be? How did he think in order to get there? But before we do, I'd love it if you support me and yourself if you want to learn more about other creative icons. If so, do it by clicking on the subscribe and like. I thank you. Number 1. He's all about individual thinking. One thing that certainly defines this very hard to define man is his rejection of groupthink. He seems almost allergic to belonging to any group with its inevitable group rules, dogmas to follow, anything like that. Like we said earlier, Duchamp seems to have been a bit of a contrarian already as a child, and I think this personality can be seen in pretty much everything he does in his life. He's often drawn to the complete opposite of what others think and do. He seems to take almost delight in pushing boundaries and even shocking at times. Now, some say that he was a bit of a fun-loving prankster, and so he took delight in sort of messing with the established art world. In fact, it's even been suggested that his urinal was just a joke. But personally, I think it's more a middle finger to the established art world, to be honest. He didn't like them. Another way his rebellious attitude reflected in his actions is how he'd rather have his urinal placed behind a curtain in an art show, rather than showing anything else that's a bit vanilla. He simply wasn't interested in art for art's sake. Number 2, I think, is the anti-stance. And that's another aspect of his anti-group think. And I think it's his more general anti-art thinking. He spent a lot of time experimenting and thinking about randomness, as we know, and how the artist's role could be reduced in this new kind of art. He's even anti in how he sees himself. He doesn't even see himself as an artist. He doesn't even see his own first ready-mades at art, at least not to begin with. And even though many artists have taken an anti-art stance since, Duchamp feels, to me at least, one of the most authentic. His art wasn't like much shock art that's followed since. For me, then, Banksy, for example, represents much more a contemporary Duchamp. So, for example, not being interested in the art establishment, not showing in traditional art museums and galleries, instead spreading ideas about something, whatever it might be. Number 3, daring to be yourself in the face of rejection. Now, it takes huge courage to be rejected and keep going. Yes, Duchamp had sold some pieces in the early New York days. Yes, he'd been a key figure in Dadaism. Yes, he'd apparently had some wealthy patrons that supported him. And yes, he was for a time a professional chess player. But income or even recognition just doesn't seem to have been too much of a worry for Duchamp. In fact, rumor has it that he didn't earn any money from his ready-mades until 1963 at the now famous Pasadena show. He certainly was rejected in a big way several times, yet it just doesn't seem to have affected him. He didn't sell out, and he certainly didn't change ideas just to please and fit in with the art market. Number 4, cross-pollinating. Having such varied sources of inspiration. It seems clear to me that if Duchamp had considered himself an artist, in a traditional sense, we would never have gotten to the urinal. If he had, he would most likely been comparing himself to other contemporary artists, and he'd been more interested in what the art market and the establishment had to say. But no, he just wasn't interested in that at all. He kept his deep interest in areas so far away from art that they're almost opposites at first glance. Science, mathematics, chess playing, etc. And yet it's exactly these influences that makes him different, makes him stand out, and able to truly redefine what art is or can be. So how would you have to think right now to make your creative work being able to change the history of art forever? Could you juxtapose your creative work with ideas born in your other interests, passions, even hobbies? Could you be braver and completely disregard any rejections or negative comments? Could you focus on your own thinking and completely shut out what the groups tell you to think? Either directly or through the trends that they want you to follow. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.